It's going to slip that way. It's going to slip the other way. No, I think it's all right. Dear hands of the cause, friends, hearing Mr. Furitan speak so eloquently to you reminded me of a story that the Master told from history. He said that there was a group of spiritually learned ones who used to gather in Iran. And they were filled with spiritual wisdom, and they would discuss important scientific and spiritual topics. And it happened one day that there was a young candidate who wished to join in with this group and had the nerve to come into the gathering and seat himself there. Then the head of the assembly took a glass and placed it on the table in front of him. And then he took a pitcher of water and he filled the glass all the way to the brim. The young man understood the message that the assemblage was already full of wisdom. And after a brief pause, he walked to the podium and very delicately floated a feather on top of the water. Now I feel as if that's the challenge I have now. Mr. Furitan has filled the cup to overflowing. I didn't know what possibly we could add. The grace and wisdom that he's explained to you, how we should teach the cause and so on. But I'll try to float a feather for you. The topic here is the gift of teaching. Now, from so many of the tablets that you yourselves, I'm sure, are familiar with, you see how Abdu'l-Baha explains, and Baha'u'llah before him, and Abdu'l-Baha particularly in some of his tablets explains what tremendous bounties come to the soul through teaching. In fact, I don't think there's any other act or service that a Baha'i can perform that produces that effect. Teaching, fireside teaching, travel teaching, pioneering, all of these things tremendously enrich and mature the soul. And it has a reciprocal effect of increasing one's understanding and also one's ability to serve. Abdu'l-Baha has announced this gift of teaching. It's quoted in his will and testament. He says, "Of all the gifts of God, the greatest is the gift of teaching. It draweth unto us the grace of God, and is our first obligation. Of such a gift, how can we deprive ourselves? Nay, our lives, our goods, our comforts, our rest, we offer them all as a sacrifice for the Abha beauty and teach the cause of God." The admonition to teach, the different admonitions to teach, come from the central figures of the faith. And Mr. Furitan has already quoted one of the central quotations in this respect. Now, I find myself, and presumably in your studies you have also confirmed this, that if you want to get to the essence of a subject quickly, first see if the guardian has addressed that subject. Because he will take an overview of the whole revelation of so many different tablets, and he will find those quotations which are of the essence of that subject, and out of the whole collection, he will put those together. And then in a short space, you have the resume, if you will, of all of the implications of this subject. Now, I particularly remember that when, for instance, out of all of the different tablets Shoghi Effendi has chosen selections for placing in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah about the greatness of Baha'u'llah's revelation. How in a few pages he expands our understanding and vision of the position and magnificence of this day, of the station of Baha'u'llah. Likewise, in God Passes By, at the beginning of the 25th chapter, he's speaking about the teaching activities of the faith. He refers to the international expansion of teaching activities. And he says that, speaking of the Baha'is who now found, after the beginning of the construction of the administrative order, the establishment of local assemblies and national assemblies, which he was guiding the Friends during the first decades of the formative age to establish and develop, they found through experience, he says, that the pattern of the administrative order, apart from its distinctive features, other distinctive features that it has, definitely encouraged efficiency and expedition in the work of teaching. And its builders found their zeal continually quickened and their missionary ardor heightened as the faith moved forward to an ever fuller emancipation. And Shoghi Effendi then refers to the mandate that comes from the central figures of the faith. It's on page 376 and 377, if you want to refer to it later. And he says first that the herald of their faith had commanded the sovereigns of the earth themselves to arise and teach his cause. Writing in the Qayyum al-Asma, O concourse of kings, deliver with truth and in all haste the verses sent down by us to the peoples of Turkey and of India, and beyond them to lands in both the east and the west. And again, issue forth from your cities, O peoples of the west. He in that same book had moreover written to aid God. We behold you from our most glorious horizon. Baha'u'llah had thus addressed his followers in his Kitab-i Aqdas, and will assist whosoever will arise to aid my cause with the hosts of the concourse on high, and a cohort of angels who are nigh unto me. Teach ye the cause of God, O people of Baha, he furthermore had written, for God hath prescribed unto every one the duty of proclaiming his message, and regardeth it as the most meritorious of all deeds. Then he affirms, should a man all alone arise in the name of Baha and put on the armor of his love, him will the Almighty cause to be victorious, though the forces of earth and heaven be arrayed against him. Should anyone arise for the triumph of our cause, he moreover has declared, him will God render victorious, though tens of thousands of enemies be leagued against him. And again he says, center your energies in the propagation of the faith of God. Whoso is worthy of so high a calling, let him arise and promote it. Whoso is unable, it is his duty to appoint him who will in his stead proclaim this revelation. And they that have forsaken their country, is his own promise, for the purpose of teaching our cause, these shall the faithful Spirit strengthen through its power. Such a service is indeed the prince of all goodly deeds and the ornament of every goodly act. And then Shoghi Effendi collects those quotations from the whole range of Abdul Baha's writings, which focus us also on this great mandate of teaching. In these days, Abdul Baha had written in his will, the most important of all things is the guidance of the nations and peoples of the world. Teaching the cause is of the utmost importance, for it is the head cornerstone of the foundation itself. In the same document, he declares that the disciples of Christ forgot themselves and all earthly things, forsook all their cares and belongings, purged themselves of self and passion, and with absolute detachment, scattered far and wide, and engaged in guiding aright the peoples of the world, till at last they made the world another world, illumined the earth, and to their last hour proved self-sacrificing in the path of God, in the path of that beloved one of God. Finally, in various lands, they suffered martyrdom. Let men of action follow in their footsteps. And finally he said in his will, when the hour cometh that this wronged and broken-winged bird will have taken its flight under the celestial concourse, it is incumbent upon the friends and loved ones, one and all, to bestir themselves and arise with heart and soul, and in one accord, to teach his cause and promote his faith. It behoveth them not to rest for a moment. They must disperse themselves in every land and travel throughout all regions, bestirred without rest and steadfast to the end. They must raise in every land the cry of Yahweh-ha-Alabha, that throughout the east and the west a vast concourse may gather under the shadow of the Word of God, that the sweet savors of holiness may be wafted, that men's faces may be illumined, that their hearts may be filled with the divine Spirit, and their souls become heavenly. The Guardian also explained to us the interaction between the divine plan and the unfoldment of the administrative order. Now you know that the divine plan is embodied in 14 tablets that Abdu'l-Baha sent to North America, where he outlined a global teaching mission to carry the cause of God to all the territories and countries of the earth. The early work of the first disciples of Abdu'l-Baha, the first itinerant traveling teachers, foremost amongst them Martha Root, all around the globe, they did great services. They proclaimed the faith to many people. But because there was no administrative structure to catch these gains, much of that was diffused and not held in the most substantial way for the faith. And so Shoghi Effendi, as you know, directed us again to the building up of administrative structure. And then after he had that developed sufficiently, in 1937, he set about the systematic prosecution of the various goals set forth in the tablets of the divine plan of the Master. And in God Passes By and other places, we see that he has extended, he says that this teaching mission, this international teaching mission, which was given to North America, has been extended by Abdu'l-Baha through the will and testament, through these very words that we've just heard, to all the Baha'is all over the world, that they should take part. And a number of independent plans under his direction were developed, various national plans, until finally these were all consummated in a 10-year global crusade. Now, under the aegis of the Universal House of Justice, we're carrying out other intercontinental teaching plans. All of these derive their spirit. You could even say that the soul of all these plans is the divine plan itself. And the prerequisites, I'm sure you're familiar with many of those. He talks about them. Again, one of them, first ones, is the necessity of firmness in the covenant, if any enterprise is to be carried out successfully. Then he talks about the love and the unity and the accord that must exist amongst the friends if they're to be successful. And then, after that, he speaks about travel. Teachers should travel to all parts of the world. Literature should be translated into the languages of the peoples. And the cause should be carried forward and established. And then he begins to name these various territories and islands all over the face of the planet where we need to establish the faith, most of which have now been open to the faith. The light of God, which was revealed from Baha'u'llah during the lifetime of Abdu'l-Baha, began to be propagated to the various continents, and in this period has been diffused over most of the countries of the globe, and which is destined through our efforts now and into the future, Shoghi Effendi indicates, to suffuse and penetrate into the full mass of the people of these various lands that have received these first rays of divine guidance. Now, if we want to ask what's left for us to do, the faith is spread all over the world, we simply have to ask how many Baha'is there are compared to the population. And we find that we're less than 1% of humanity. So our teaching mission really has hardly begun. When you think the teaching work of the cause of God really lies ahead of us. We've been learning, we've been experimenting, we've been setting these first outposts. Some of them we've raised and lost again. We've gone and reconquered them. We're trying to find the correct battle lines. We're trying to school ourselves in that wisdom and eloquence that Mr. Fortin has referred to, so that we'll be successful in the teaching work and be able to go forward and fulfill this mission which the Master has really given us as an inheritance. A duty, but at the same time, the greatest gift. Now we come to the topic of preparing for teaching. When we look at the writings on this subject, we see that on the one hand, there's a polarity, like in so many of the subjects that we find in the cause. We can take two quotations which are apparently opposite, or not contradictive, but certainly very different, apparently, in the spirit that they express. And when we study the full range of the writings, we find, as Shoghi Effendi said in a letter, those lines which connect these opposite poles and create a whole. That's why we should not quote one aspect of the teachings out of context from the other aspects. If we're going to enter into this, we should try to balance them. So on the one hand, we see that all of us should arise to teach, that there's not a moment to waste, that we should enter the battle, that it doesn't matter if we can't read and write, it doesn't matter if we're poor, impoverished, if we apparently have no means. We should place all our reliance on God and move forward into the field. And at the opposite end of the pole, Baha'u'llah says, if ye will arise to teach the cause of God, teach ye first your own selves, so that your words will take effect in those whom you teach. So we want to have a combination of this. We don't want to hold back and not serve because we never feel ourselves adequately prepared to teach the faith. But as we move forward, as we make our first attempts to teach, we should be, it seems to me from the indications in the writings, we should be constantly bolstering ourselves through greater immersion in the texts, through imbibing and gathering the strength and force and vision which a careful study of the writings and reading the messages of the Beloved Guardian and the Universal House of Justice will give us. And a few quotations about this from letters of the Guardian. One that speaks to us of several processes going on all at the same time in our lives. And here he says, never must, this is a letter written on his behalf, he says, never must they, the believers, let a day pass without teaching some soul, trusting to Baha'u'llah that the seed will grow. The friends should seek pure souls, gain their confidence, and then teach that person carefully until he becomes a Baha'i. And then nurture him until he becomes a firm and active supporter of the faith. I'd like to stop here before going on with this quotation to mention that, you know, in one of the later messages of Shoghi Effendi to the West, he draws a distinction between two processes. One, he says, is the process of the attraction and confirming of avowed believers in the cause of God. Avowed, someone who says, declares that they are a Baha'i, that they believe in the faith. And how that process must, under no circumstances, be slowed down. It should move forward continually. right after that he says, no less important is the process of raising up and greatly increasing the number of active supporters of the cause of God. Now this is one of the areas where we seem to not run as strong as we need to. I think from the point of view of what we have been seeing around the Baha'i world and at the Teaching Center, that we all need to follow through in the teaching work from this stage of attracting and having people affirm the truth of the faith, and then not leaving them alone, but as the Guardian says here, nurturing him until he becomes a firm and active supporter of the faith. With some souls, this will be perhaps very soon, that they will take unto themselves reading the writings, studying the faith, praying, arising, offering their services to the administration, contributing to the Baha'i funds, and then teaching the cause themselves, attracting that grace and confirmation in their own lives. In the meanwhile, if we've planted seeds and they have begun to grow, if we don't nurture them and bring them somewhat to maturity where the plant can stand on its own feet, we're in danger of losing these new plants. Now this becomes a very critical issue when you're dealing with primitive peoples, or if you will, illiterate people. Not that they're any less intelligent, we shouldn't imagine that, but the circumstances of their lives haven't allowed them to learn reading and writing, for example. So they don't have access directly to the books. And in that case, the Baha'i teacher, Yani, as Mr. Fortan says, everybody, all of us. The Baha'i teacher, in a sense, must become the embodiment of the Book of God. And in all the teaching work, we see also how important it is that the Baha'i teacher be the embodiment of Baha'i qualities and Baha'i virtues. Because that, in itself, the light of a goodly character, he says, is as bright as the light of the sun. That in itself immediately attracts attention. And the House of Justice, in one of their early messages, supplementing the comments that they made on teaching the masses, has placed a number of quotations together regarding the qualifications of travel teachers, so that they will, in the institutes, in the Baha'i courses and study around the world, these points will be brought to the believer's attention. And they center on the fact that they should be the embodiment, again, of all of these Baha'i qualities and virtues. And that they should also learn the faith well enough so that they can express it in its right form. So that even though they have to repeat or perhaps read the words to the people, that they should teach them prayers, they should teach them those things which will be through which they will be able to sustain themselves. I'm sure that those of us that have traveled and visited primitive peoples realize the great acuity with which they can capture and remember things. If you're a person that doesn't read and write, or can't see it on television every evening, you may decide that you need to not lose this moment in your life when you're hearing something. And all of their powers of concentration are there. And you find months later going back that they will repeat things to you that you said on a previous trip. And that becomes very exciting, because then if they learn the prayers, they're able to then teach them to each other. Another road of access that the House of Justice has stressed very much in this whole teaching process in the third world are classes for children, because the children are also very quick to learn. And if they learn the prayers, if you don't have long enough to teach the adults, teach the children the prayers, then they will repeat them to their parents. But this is a whole question. You can see how many people, how many Baha'is are needed to help with this process, when 2/3 of the world's people are still illiterate. In fact, according to some astonishing statistics, it seems like the United States is becoming more and more illiterate too, so we'll probably have that to face there also. People are not accustomed to reading books. And we're going to have to draw them back to this source of life, which is the Word of God. So we have this dual process of bringing people to the faith and then raising them up so that they can assist in the work, because we're going to need more and more active supporters of the cause. Now, Shukhi Effendi in this letter goes on to say that everyone must remember that it is the Holy Spirit that quickens. And therefore the teacher must become like a reed through which the Holy Spirit may reach the seeking soul. And here we have the essence, really, of preparation for Baha'i teaching. And this is the goal of Baha'i life in itself, isn't it? Becoming selfless, becoming sensitive to the will of God, the purpose of God, through the holy words of God, acting on that knowledge, on that understanding, on that vision. Then the guardian, it says, the beloved guardian has stressed over and over again that to effectively teach the faith, the individual, now he's talking about teaching, but doesn't say what you're going to say to the individual. He talks about what you have to do to prepare yourself. He says, to effectively teach the faith, the individual must study deeply the divine word, imbibe its life-giving waters, and feast upon its glorious teachings. 3 aspects to study. Imbibing, and then he says also imbibing its life-giving waters and feasting upon the glorious teachings. And fortunately, those of us that are living here at the World Center, we have this opportunity of being able to serve actively in support of the Universal House of Justice, which I think all of us realize, being here, we are supporting that channel of divine guidance that reaches out to the Baha'is, that moves them to teach, that propels the teaching processes in the world. That if you weren't here supporting the House of Justice, how would their messages and their guidance get out to the rest of the friends? So this becomes very critical here. But at the same time, we all have times and opportunities when we move out from the World Center, perhaps on a holiday, on a visit somewhere, and we are constantly running into people, and we are probably alert to the teaching opportunities because we don't have so many here. We are alert to the ones that we have outside. So that also we should be constantly honing our instrument, if you would. It doesn't hurt to have your sword sharp. Sharp sword isn't going to bother anything. Just constantly while you're here, you're imbibing from these teachings, you're learning more, you're preparing yourself. Then when you do act, it will be effective. Effectively teach, he says. So this is the first one, study deeply. He should then meditate on the import of the word and finding its spiritual depth, pray for guidance and assistance. But most important, after prayer is action. After one has prayed and meditated, he must arise, relying fully on the guidance and confirmation of Baha'u'llah, to teach his faith. Perseverance in action is essential, just as wisdom and audacity are necessary for effective teaching. Perseverance in action is essential. Anybody that's been in the pioneer field or has dedicated themselves even on the home front to constant teaching, has centered their lives in the propagation of the cause of God, knows how important that is. How important it is to persevere. And Shoghi Effendi uses in some of these letters, I noticed happily, because sometimes you get a little worried, he says persistently pursue the teaching. Where that we have to follow through with people, not let them loose too easily from their attraction to the cause of God. Presenting over and over opportunities for them to be attracted to the faith and associate with the believers. Finally, he says, the individual must sacrifice all things to this great goal. And then the victories will be won. So we have, in summary, prayer, meditation, study, and action as these 4 elements of our Baha'i service if we want to effectively teach. And we see that 3 of them really are internal to produce the proper kind of action, to make us arise with the full vigor of our beings and to persevere towards the goal set by the central figures. In what way should we arise? Again, the admonitions of Baha'u'llah have been summarized by Shoghi Effendi in a single page of the Advent of Divine Justice. Culling from so many different tablets of Baha'u'llah, he has made a resume of admonitions from the central figure of our faith. Let me read some of these for you. This is from the Advent of Divine Justice, page 59 begins. Let some at this very moment gird up the loins of their endeavor, flee their native towns, cities, and states, forsake their country, and putting their whole trust in God as the best provision for their journey, set their faces and direct their steps towards those distant climes, those virgin fields, those unsurrendered cities, and bend their energies to capture the citadels of men's hearts. Hearts which, as Baha'u'llah has written, the hosts of revelation and of utterance can subdue. Let them at the very outset teach their own selves, that their speech may attract the hearts of their hearers. Let them regard the triumph of their faith as their supreme objective. Let them not consider the largeness or smallness of the receptacle that carries the measure of grace that God poureth forth in this age. Let them disencumber themselves of all attachment to this world and the vanities thereof. Now, all of these essential words in each of these passages are from the tablets of Baha'u'llah. If I say quote unquote, there's so many of them that will confuse the reading. But you go back and you'll see that the hearts of each of these, of course, as you'll recall, are from the tablets of Baha'u'llah. Let them disencumber themselves of all attachment to this world and the vanities thereof. And with that spirit of detachment, which Abdul-Baha exemplified and wished them to emulate, bring these diversified people and countries to the remembrance of God and His supreme manifestation. Let His love be a storehouse of treasure for their souls. On the day when every pillar shall tremble, when the very skins of men shall creep, when all eyes shall stare up with terror. Let their souls be aglow with the flame of the undying fire that burneth in the midmost heart of the world, in such wise that the waters of the universe shall be powerless to cool down its ardor. Let them be unrestrained as the wind, which neither the sight of desolation nor the evidences of prosperity can either pain or please. Let them unloose their tongues and proclaim unceasingly His cause. Let them beware lest they contend with anyone, nay, strive to make him aware of the truth with kindly manner and most convincing exhortation. He goes on with three more. He says, let them wholly, for the sake of God, proclaim His message. And with that same spirit, accept whatever response their words may evoke in their hearers. Let them not for one moment forget that the faithful Spirit shall strengthen them through its power, and that a company of His chosen angels shall go forth with them, as bidden by Him who is the Almighty, the All-Wise. Let them ever bear in mind how great is the blessedness that awaiteth them that have attained the honor of serving the Almighty. And remember that such a service is indeed the prince of all goodly deeds and the ornament of every goodly act. Again, from experiences in the bush, out in the mountains itself, you realize how significant these words become to the Baha'i traveling teacher. The one who's out there, maybe all by themselves, passing through difficult circumstances and not knowing where they're going to eat next or where possibly they'll sleep. And the snow starts snowing on the mountaintop and you just don't know what's going to happen next. And you remember that the faithful Spirit is with you and that this host of angels comes and somehow your soul is lifted. And you walk a little bit farther and there comes some person that you've never seen before and says, "What are you doing here? This is late and this is cold. Come with me. I'll take you to my house." And that's the beginning of a new teaching experience. That became so familiar in Nicaragua. This is not where the snow was. The snow was in Bolivia. But in Nicaragua, the tropical setting there, you would walk through the bush. There would be a road and they would tell you that eventually there's a village down at the end of this road. So you'd set off to that village, and then they would say, when you got to that village, that the people from this place now don't live here anymore. They live somewhere else. And then, so you would have to go walking on some miles. And they said you can find them in that place. And then you go walking and you come to a river. Well, it's a big river, and you're not going to be able to cross it. And that's the end of the road. So you start saying your prayers, and then somebody comes along in a canoe and says, "What are you doing here in the middle of the bush?" and takes you to the village, and then the whole thing unfolds gradually. But there's always those moments when you have to remember that God is going to help you. And this experience, I think, talking with so many of you young people, I hope will be able to go out and taste yourselves that kind of service on the ground, in the field, around the world, in countries and in areas where people have not yet heard of Baha'u'llah, or where some of them have heard, but there's a lot more that still need to hear. And experience for yourselves what it is to place your reliance under such circumstances in Baha'u'llah, and to see the wonders of how the cause unfolds before you. And to experience, as perhaps you have found in your teaching work in other places, the miraculous at the same time. I mean, where someone comes out of a village as you're approaching and not knowing what you're going to say to them, and if these people are going to receive me well or not, and not being sure what language they will understand, and having the chief come out and call to you people, "Come, come," and say that he's had a dream the night before that two people were coming to bring a message, and what is this message that you've brought? That kind of confirmation you experience in the teaching field. Especially you experience it with indigenous peoples. And if you have this opportunity to go out and taste that, now you have this call for a year of service. I myself don't believe in a year of service. I think that's wonderful. A year of service is wonderful. Because I believe if you get out for a year of service, then you'll have a life of service. If you can get the taste of it, you will go forward with this, and your whole direction of your being will be transformed. And the opportunity that I think particularly young people have here is to take this opportunity now here to read and to study and to arm yourself for the adventures that you'll have ahead of you. And that then you'll be able to get into other circumstances. Perhaps you'll be able to design your lives or choose your careers in such a way that you will have some free time. I think too many of us choose occupations in life which completely consume all of our energies. There are still things like teaching, being teachers, being professors, whatever it is, that will allow you a period of months, even in a year, where you'll be free to teach. There may be various things that you should consider, how you would have time to fulfill this responsibility that Baha'u'llah has laid on you. Of course, in your university studies or in your work situation, you'll be in touch with many, many people, and those will, as the Guardian said, most surely be the ones you will teach. Your neighbors and your associates in your work. Wherever you are, that will be possible. But this special area of service of which some of you will arise to perform, I'm sure you will find most sweet. And it is the single opportunity where one can really center themselves for a time in the propagation of the faith with your whole being. physical, mental, and spiritual. Now, with regard to methods to adopt, how are we doing on time for stuff? A few comments from letters of the Guardian or letters written on his behalf. And this reinforces the point we made earlier about active supporters. He says, every laborer in those fields, whether as traveling teacher or settler, should, I feel, make it his chief and constant concern to mix in a friendly manner with all sections of the population, irrespective of class, creed, nationality, or color. To familiarize himself with their ideas, tastes, and habits, to study the approach best suited to them, to concentrate patiently and tactfully on a few who have shown marked capacity and receptivity, and to endeavor with extreme kindness to implant such love, zeal, and devotion in their hearts as to enable them to become in turn self-sufficient and independent promoters of the faith in their respective localities. Now, this challenge with the entry of troops still remains. Because even when we bring in large numbers of believers, and they have become avowed followers of the faith, avowed believers in the cause, from amongst them we have to find those keys, those most receptive elements, the ones that are eager and thirsty for deepening, that we can confirm so that they in turn will become the upholders of the cause in those localities and assist the others. There'll always be some that are out in front. The House of Justice refers to them as key believers in each locality. And just as we are all different in our nature and character, there are always those that are more receptive or more eager wherever we go. We should try to identify these and pour that special attention on them, which we previously did before they enrolled. Because it's going to be one way or the other. If you have a point of enrollment in the cause, sometimes you've had to work very hard to bring people to enrollment. Sometimes enrollment is quite easy. They're immediately attracted and can see the good sense of the faith and recognize the light of the cause. But then the detailed working through the conversion process, if you will, is necessarily a lengthy one, a slow and lengthy one. There are words of the Guardian to that effect here in these letters. Although they become Baha'is immediately, all of us remember how we had to go through various stages to clean out old concepts and ideas and replace them with the divine principles and teachings. And naturally, this is slow and it takes time, but to the degree that we do it, we will become more effective as promoters of the cause and as teachers. And as Mr. Fortan had pointed out here, this question of being a physician, a spiritual physician, and choosing the right remedy for each individual, Shoghi Effendi has extended that here to choosing the right remedy for each class, for each race, for each nation. What is that particular way of presenting the cause which will most appeal to them and draw them unto Baha'u'llah, draw them unto God? Abdul Baha says that in the teaching work, God forbid we should take something from the divine teachings and place it as an obstacle in the path of the seeker. It's possible to do this, We can introduce at the wrong time. But the same story about announcing Baha'u'llah as the Lord of Hosts too early in the process. Perhaps will cause people to turn back from the cause. God forbid, Abdul Baha says, he said, the whole purpose of the revelation is to attract people to God. Now, should we use the revelation in such a way that it will keep them from the faith of God? This is another reason why we have to teach ourselves the faith. So we'll have the tools, we'll have the repertoire, we'll have the experience, we'll know which remedies are available. And not invent one perhaps on the spot, as sometimes in the early stages of teaching we're prone to doing, You can identify 3 stages of teachers. The first stage where one is eager about the faith, has accepted the cause, and there's this, particularly where Baha'is, because of teaching on life after death, or because of the teaching on international language, Or perhaps because of the teaching on the spiritual solution of the economic problem. So whoever we speak to, that's the aspect we're going to present as being important. We'll give that and then some of our own ideas on the subject, which we find rather interesting. Well, this has its effect. But it surely won't be effective as the next stage of teacher, where the teacher advances to the stage where we know the teachings of the cause well enough to present them in their pure form. Pure form, though in our own words, we're conveying the meaning of these things, we have a balance in the way we teach. And this is, of course, more ideal. On the third stage, which would be the most ideal, is to be able to cite passages, to have memorized particularly potent passages from the writings that we can use in the teaching work. And again, I would, from my own experience, suggest to you that you look very carefully in the writings of the guardian for those passages. Because he has chosen, out of the whole revelation, when he's explaining the cause, these passages from Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, from the Bab, which really punctuate the meaning of world order, of the coming of the faith, and the implications it has. Instead of, say, you start with the gleanings, and you say, well, what shall I memorize from the gleanings? Start through the guardians, through the pathway of the guardian. You'll find it much quicker. Now, that third and highest stage, of course, involves memorization. To assess its, in other words, the individual's duty, the character of the duty that each of us has. Consult his conscience. Prayerfully consider all its aspects. Now, those of you who are on the threshold of going out from the World Center are in the process of doing this. Manfully struggle against the natural inertia that weighs him down in his effort to arise. Shed heroically and irrevocably the trivial and superfluous attachments which hold him back. Empty himself of every thought that may tend to obstruct his path. Mix in obedience to the counsels of the author of his faith and in imitation of the one who is its true exemplar with men and women in all walks of life. Seek to touch their hearts through, I find this very, very interesting. He says, through the distinction which characterizes his thoughts, his words, and his acts. Again, this distinction that the Master calls for, that the Baha'i should have. And win them over tactfully, lovingly, prayerfully, and persistently to the faith he himself has espoused. That's from Citadel of Faith, page 148. The paragraph just before this, too, I recommend to your reading. He talks about the would-be warrior in the crusade and how we have to break loose from the effects of materialism, which most of us in the West were burdened down with, that really kept us from moving because we had all kinds of material goals. We had a shopping list, if you will, of what we wanted to get out of life, and we were going down and ticking the things off. Somehow we have to remove that from our lives. And our shopping list should become the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, the goals, these very admonitions that Baha'u'llah makes for us. Again, continuing on method. Shoghi Effendi has often in his letters mentioned the importance of follow-up work. Seeds sown but not watered and reared will not mature into fruition. And again he says, with regard to choosing the method by which we would teach personally, he says, in teaching the cause, much depends on the personality of the teacher and on the methods he chooses for presenting the message. Different personalities and different classes and types of individuals need different methods of approach. And it is the sign of an able teacher to know how to best adapt his methods to various types of people whom he happens to meet. There is no one method one can follow all through. there should be as many ways of approach as there are types of individual seekers. Flexibility and variety of method is therefore an essential prerequisite for the success of every teaching activity. So much for being taught a formula how to teach, what you're going to say when you go out on the street, and the first thing you should say is this, and the second thing you should say is this, and the third thing you should say is this. This is a very primitive way of teaching, and it runs the risk of overriding all of the wisdom that's called for in teaching. Surely we should know the things we should say, but we have to see the order we present them, when we present them, how we present them, so that it will be effective. And again, not act as, God forbid that also our teaching method shouldn't act as an obstacle for the attraction of souls to the faith. As some of the people that are propagating their teachings in the world are finding, that the very aggressiveness, for example, with which they try to get across their message, particularly not allowing you to say a word, mostly, so that they can get their full pitch, it just makes you recoil. You really don't, you can't listen. All you want to do is get away, Now, if we adopt methods of that sort, that would be tragedy for the cause of God, considering all of the wisdom and balance that is called for in our teachings. And we have the perfect repertoire, if you will, of remedies to solve people's ills. Chogi Fendi, again, he says, there are innumerable ways of teaching the cause. You can choose the one that suits best your nature and capacity. Not all of us have to be public speakers. Not all of us have to walk across the velds of Africa. But we need some to do both. And we need some to do this daily teaching in their own lives, with their own families, with their own children, all of these things. A couple more along this line. He says, our teaching methods should allow a certain degree of elasticity in establishing contacts with various types of individual seekers. Every inquirer has to be approached from his own angle. Those who are essentially of the mystic type should first be given those teachings of the cause that emphasize the nature and value of spiritual realities, while those who are practical-minded and of a positive type are naturally more ready and inclined to accept the social aspect of the teachings. But of course, gradually, the entire, this word is emphasized, the entire message in all its aspects, and with the full implications it entails, should be explained to the newcomer. For to be a believer means to accept the cause in its wholeness, and not to adhere to some of its teachings. However, as already stated, this ought to be done gradually and tactfully, for conversion, after all, is a slow process. These, by the way, these quotations I'm reading to you are all from a booklet called The Individual and Teaching, which is a compilation prepared by the Universal House of Justice on teaching. And it came in the middle of the 5-year plan, at a time when many letters were coming about confusion in teaching methods, and how should we teach, and should we have direct teaching, or should we have indirect teaching. And the House of Justice compiled this marvelous compilation and indicated that in these holy texts, the friends could find guidance and answer to these various questions. A word about Farsight teaching. It says here in a letter written on behalf of the Guardian, the Guardian feels that the most effective way for the friends to teach the faith is to make strong friends with their neighbors and associates. When the friends have confidence in the Baha'is and the Baha'is in their friends, they should give the message and teach the cause. Individual teaching of this type is more effective than any other type. This was, of course, written to North America. It's applicable in North America and Europe, and in the cities of the Third World. It also has basically applicable. In some of the, village areas, in mass teaching areas, there can be a difference in approach, because there's a much more there's a similarity of mentality of the people, which allows you to find a way of teaching which reaches all the hearts at the same time. And the very fact that such villages don't always have visitors, certainly don't always have visitors that come to give them a message, causes the arrival of a Baha'i teacher to be an event. So you can't sit down and start to make friends with the people because they want to know what you're there for. They're right off. It's the very circumstances of it bring the cause into the forefront. And it provides the natural opportunity to proclaim the faith. Quite different from somebody coming out of a supermarket that you stop and say, have you heard of Baha'u'llah? Who may be intending to do something else at that moment and doesn't really have time to listen. It's a different situation. So he's mentioning here that the fireside, the principle of fireside meeting, which was established in order to permit and encourage the individuals to teach in his own home, has been proven the most effective instrument for spreading the faith. Now, that of course, again, we have to see that within the context of that particular kind of teaching in modern cities and general urban context. But the principle of allowing individuals to ask questions and to have some individual attention from the Baha'i teacher, that principle still, I think, carries over into the villages. It's still needed there. Even if you have 100 people come into the faith, you've got to find those key believers and give them that special attention which makes them want to continue and be the center of activity and be ready to advise the other friends when Baha'is will return and start that community on the road to some kind of community consolidation. The question of the ultimate goal, we know, is the regeneration of mankind. Our teaching work is not simply the process of passing information. The more we deepen in these texts and in the call of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha with regard to teaching, the more we see that he calls on us to breathe life into the souls of men. That the human heart is an instrument which remains in darkness until it's touched by divine light. That the Baha'i teachers should be the carrier of this light. And in their statements, in the attitude that they have, in the way that they address with modesty, with love, the individuals that they're teaching, they should allow, Shoghi Effendi says here, they allow these rays to enter the hearts of their listeners. This is a spiritual process, and it creates these very close bonds. And all of us that have experienced it realize what a divine favor it is to be involved at all in such an event, to see the awakening and unfolding of a heart because of the beauty and illumination of the divine teachings. To see these souls progress to the point where they become the instrument for the illumination of others. Baha'u'llah says that this act is so great that if you quicken one soul in the cause of God, you will bring one soul to the cause of God. Quicken that soul, you will have the station of a martyr. Now, again, all these requisites are behind it and everything we need. But there are 3 points that I'd like to finish with. And these you can also find in another small booklet that's here, which is very important, another compilation called The Power of Divine Assistance. There are 3 very important principles mentioned over and over in this compilation. One is that the believer, if he's to be able to do anything, must disregard his own weaknesses, frailties, shortcomings, inadequacies, all the things that if we were to focus on them, Shoghi Effendi says, we would become inert. We'll stop. We won't be able to move. If we fix on our own limitations, our own knowledge, we will excuse ourselves from the teaching work. Fortunately, Mr. Fortan has said we can't do that really. We can't excuse ourselves. This is a duty which is imperative on anybody, on everybody. So what do we do next? He says, turn away from those things, and in all these passages he says, place your whole confidence in the promises of Baha'u'llah, that this grace will come if we act on those promises, if we move. And that's the third principle, is to get up and do what we've been asked to do. And leave the rest to Him. All of this preparation should be going on all the time. But this essential turning away from ourselves, turning to Him, and moving forward confidently that He will aid us, that He will actually give us the words to be able to speak to the atheists. That somehow we'll find the way and give the right answers if we have the right spiritual attitude of devotion and consecration to the teaching. And for me, this is the center of this circle of the spirit of teaching. Is the selfless devotion and submission of each of us as Baha'is to this imperative call of teaching, which will result in the establishment of this new kingdom of Baha'u'llah in this world. I do not